In the small, quiet town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow pace. The streets were lined with modest houses, and the air always carried the faint scent of fresh hay from nearby farms. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and dreams often stayed tucked away in the corners of people's minds, overshadowed by practicality. But not for Eleanor Ellie Grayson. Ellie was different. From the moment she could walk, Ellie had an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. Her dad, a farmer who spent most days fixing broken tractors or patching up fences, noticed this early on. He'd often find her sitting cross-legged in the barn, surrounded by tools and gears, trying to figure out what made machines tick. By the time she turned 10, Ellie could take apart and reassemble almost anything her dad owned, except maybe his stubborn old radio, which seemed to resist even her best efforts. But it wasn't just machines that fascinated Ellie, it was flight. She remembered the exact moment her life changed forever. She was 8 years old, standing barefoot in a field during the annual Willow Creek Air Show. The roar of engines filled the sky as fighter jets zoomed overhead, leaving trails of white smoke behind them. One jet in particular caught her eye, a sleek silver bird that seemed to slice through the clouds effortlessly. Ellie stood there, mouth agape, heart racing. "I want to do that," she whispered to herself. From that day forward, flying became her dream. Growing up in Willow Creek wasn't easy for someone with big ambitions like Ellie. Most kids around her thought about getting jobs at the local factory or helping their families on the farm. Dreams of becoming a pilot. That was something you saw in movies, not something real people pursued. Still, Ellie held on to her goal. After finishing high school, she made a bold decision. She enlisted in the military. If she couldn't afford flight school, maybe the armed forces would give her a chance to get closer to her dream. Her first assignment was at Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas. It wasn't glamorous, far from it. Ellie started as a mechanic, working long hours in sweltering hangars, tightening bolts, checking fuel lines, and making sure planes were ready for takeoff. At first, no one paid much attention to her. She was just another recruit, one of many keeping the base running smoothly. But it didn't take long for Ellie to stand out. She had a knack for spotting problems others missed. Once, when a trainer jet kept stalling mid-flight, the entire maintenance team scratched their heads over what could be causing it. Ellie, who had been quietly observing the issue, pointed out a tiny crack in the engine housing, a flaw so small that most people wouldn't have noticed it. Fixing it solved the problem instantly. Word spread quickly among the crew. If anyone could fix a plane, it was Ellie. Despite her growing reputation as a skilled mechanic, Ellie faced constant challenges. Many of her superiors didn't believe women belonged anywhere near the cockpit, let alone piloting multi-million-dollar aircraft. Whenever she asked about opportunities to train as a pilot, she was met with dismissive remarks. "Stick to wrenches, kid," one officer told her with a smirk. "That's where you shine." It hurt, but Ellie refused to let it break her spirit. Instead, she threw herself into her work, determined to prove her worth. Late at night, after her shifts ended, she studied aviation manuals and watched videos of test flights. She memorized every detail about the planes she worked on, their specifications, capabilities, and quirks. Slowly but surely, she began to understand these machines better than anyone else on the base. Then came the incident that would change everything. During a routine inspection, Ellie noticed something unusual about a fighter jet scheduled for deployment. Its landing gear mechanism looked unstable, and she raised concerns to her supervisor. But instead of listening, he brushed her off, accusing her of being overly cautious. Frustrated, Ellie pressed the issue, insisting the plane wasn't safe to fly. This only angered her superior further. Within hours, she was called into an office and informed that her services were no longer needed. Just like that, Ellie was kicked out of the airbase. Leaving Laughlin felt like a punch to the gut. For weeks afterward, Ellie struggled to come to terms with what had happened. She replayed the events in her mind, wondering if she should have stayed quiet, played along, and accepted her role as just a mechanic. But deep down, she knew she couldn't have done anything differently. standing up for what she believed in, even if it cost her dearly, was part of who she was. What Ellie didn't realize then was that her journey was far from over. Being forced out of the base might have closed one door, but it opened another. Little did she know, her determination and passion for flight would lead her down a path she never imagined, one that would bring her back to Laughlin, not as a mechanic, but as a pilot flying the most advanced aircraft ever built, the SR-72 Darkstar. For now, though, Ellie packed her bags, said goodbye to the friends she'd made, and headed west to Los Angeles. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain: giving up wasn't an option. The skies were calling her name, and she intended to answer. After leaving Laughlin Air Force Base, Ellie felt like she'd been dropped into a world that didn't quite fit her anymore. The rejection stung, but it also lit a fire inside her, a quiet, stubborn determination to prove everyone wrong. She packed up her belongings, said goodbye to the few friends she'd made, and headed west to Los Angeles. It wasn't an easy decision. Moving to a big city meant starting over, finding a new job, and figuring out how to survive in a place where dreams often got swallowed whole. But Ellie had no other choice. She couldn't let go of her passion for flight, and she refused to let anyone else define her limits. Los Angeles was overwhelming at first. The city buzzed with energy, cars honking, people rushing past, skyscrapers towering overhead. But Ellie found solace in the quieter corners. She rented a tiny apartment near the outskirts of town, just close enough to downtown to feel connected, but far enough to avoid the chaos. Her first priority was finding work. Without much experience outside of aircraft maintenance, her options were limited. After weeks of searching, she landed a job at a small aerospace company that specialized in repairing experimental drones. The work wasn't glamorous. Most days, Ellie spent hours hunched over tables cluttered with wires, circuit boards, and pieces of shattered carbon fiber. The drones came in battered and broken, victims of failed test flights or manufacturing defects. But Ellie didn't mind. To her, these machines were puzzles waiting to be solved, and every repair brought her one step closer to understanding the cutting edge of aviation technology. Plus, there was something thrilling about working on machines designed to push boundaries, to fly faster, higher, and farther than anything before them. It wasn't long before Ellie caught the attention of one of the senior engineers at the company. He was older, with graying hair and glasses perpetually perched on the tip of his nose. Unlike many of the others, he didn't dismiss Ellie because of her age or lack of formal education. Instead, he saw potential in her. One day, after watching her troubleshoot a particularly tricky issue with a drone's navigation system, he pulled her aside. "You've got a gift," he said simply, leaning against a workbench. "I don't know where you picked it up, but you're good at this. Better than most." Ellie blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks," she replied, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. I like figuring things out." He nodded thoughtfully. "Ever think about doing more? Drones are fine, sure, but they're just the beginning. There's a whole world of advanced aircraft out there. Stuff most people can't even imagine. You should see it." That conversation changed everything. Over the next few months, the engineer became a mentor to Ellie, teaching her about aerodynamics, stealth technology, and the science behind hypersonic flight. They pored over blueprints together during lunch breaks, debated the merits of different engine designs, and stayed late into the night running simulations on old computers. For Ellie, it was like unlocking a hidden door to a universe she'd only dreamed of. Every lesson brought her closer to the kind of knowledge she'd always craved, the kind that could help her break into the elite world of aviation. But learning wasn't enough. Ellie wanted to fly, and not just any plane. She wanted to pilot the SR-72 Darkstar, a mythical aircraft whispered about in hushed tones among aviators. Rumors said it was capable of speeds exceeding Mach 6, invisible to radar, and so advanced that it blurred the line between science fiction and reality. While many dismissed the SR-72 as nothing more than a legend, Ellie became obsessed with it. She devoured every scrap of information she could find, reading technical papers, studying patent filings, and sketching her own designs based on what little she knew. Her obsession didn't go unnoticed. Some of her co-workers teased her, calling her the dreamer behind her back. Others rolled their eyes when she asked questions about hypersonic propulsion systems or tried to explain why certain materials worked better for stealth technology. But Ellie didn't care. She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. Late at night, when the workshop was empty and the hum of machinery faded into silence, Ellie would sit alone at her desk, staring at pictures of sleek fighter jets and experimental planes. She imagined herself in the cockpit, hands gripping the controls, heart pounding as she pushed the throttle to its limit. Those moments kept her going, even when the road ahead seemed impossibly steep. One evening, while tinkering with a prototype drone, Ellie struck up a conversation with another engineer who had recently transferred from a defense contractor. He spoke cautiously, carefully choosing his words, but it was clear he knew more than he let on. When Ellie mentioned the SR-72, his eyes lit up briefly before he masked his excitement. "It's real," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Not officially, of course, but trust me, it exists." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. "Do you know anything about it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He hesitated, then leaned in closer. "All I'll say is this. If you want to get close to something like that, you need to aim higher. Bigger companies, classified projects, places where they're willing to take risks and where they might overlook someone's background if they're desperate enough." Those words stuck with Ellie. For the first time, she realized that maybe her unconventional path wasn't a disadvantage. Maybe it was exactly what she needed to stand out in a field dominated by tradition and rigid expectations. With renewed determination, she began applying to jobs at larger aerospace firms, targeting companies known for working on top-secret government contracts. Each application was a gamble, but Ellie poured her soul into every cover letter and resume, making sure they reflected not just her skills, but her unshakable passion for flight. Months passed without success. Rejection letters piled up, each one a reminder of how far she still had to go. But Ellie refused to give up. She reminded herself of the little girl in Willow Creek who had stared up at the sky, wide-eyed and full of wonder. That girl hadn't given up, and neither would she. Finally, after nearly a year of relentless effort, Ellie received an offer she couldn't believe. A position at Skunk, Lockheed Martin's secretive division responsible for developing some of the most advanced aircraft in history. The email arrived late at night, and Ellie read it over and over again, afraid she was dreaming. When it finally sank in, she let out a laugh that echoed through her tiny apartment. Skunk wasn't just any workplace. It was a fortress of innovation, surrounded by layers of secrecy and guarded by strict protocols. On her first day, Ellie walked through the doors feeling both exhilarated and terrified. The building itself looked ordinary from the outside, but inside, it buzzed with activity. Engineers moved briskly between offices, technicians huddled around computer screens, and massive hangar doors hinted at the wonders hidden within. Ellie's role initially involved analyzing data from test flights and troubleshooting mechanical issues, tasks that aligned closely with her previous experience. But she quickly proved herself indispensable, solving problems others deemed unsolvable, and offering insights that impressed even the most seasoned veterans. Her reputation grew, earning her access to increasingly sensitive projects, including, eventually, the elusive SR-72 Darkstar. Seeing the Darkstar in person for the first time took Ellie's breath away. It was everything she'd imagined and more. Sleek, black, and impossibly futuristic. Its design seemed almost alien, as though it belonged to another era entirely. As she ran her fingers along its smooth surface, Ellie felt a surge of pride mixed with awe. This was the machine that had fueled her dreams for years, and now she was standing right beside it. But being near the Darkstar wasn't enough. Ellie wanted to understand it completely, to know its secrets inside and out. She threw herself into her work, studying every aspect of the aircraft's performance, poring over flight logs and running countless simulations. She memorized its specs, learned its quirks, and mastered the complex systems that made it tick. Slowly but surely, Ellie became the go-to expert on the Darkstar, earning respect from colleagues who once doubted her abilities. Still, there was one thing missing: the chance to actually fly it. Pilots were handpicked for test flights, and despite her expertise, Ellie's lack of official credentials kept her grounded. Frustrated but undeterred, she turned to the next best thing: simulators. Late at night, when the facility was nearly empty, Ellie snuck into the training room and practiced flying the Darkstar in virtual scenarios. She pushed the simulated aircraft to its limits, testing maneuvers and strategies that most pilots wouldn't dare attempt. Each session left her exhausted but exhilarated. Flying the Darkstar, even in a simulator, felt like stepping into a future she'd always envisioned for herself. And though she knew the real thing was still out of reach, Ellie held on to hope. If there was one thing she'd learned throughout her journey, it was that opportunities often came when you least expected them. All she had to do was be ready. As the weeks turned into months, Ellie continued to prove herself indispensable. She knew it was only a matter of time before fate gave her the opening she needed. Until then, she kept her head down, worked hard, and waited for her moment to shine. Ellie's life at Skunk Works became a whirlwind of activity. Every day brought new challenges, and every challenge pushed her closer to the edge of what she thought was possible. The SR-72 Darkstar wasn't just an aircraft, it was a masterpiece of engineering, a symbol of human ingenuity that defied the laws of physics. Ellie had spent countless hours studying it, learning its quirks and understanding its systems. She could dismantle its engine in her sleep and explain the aerodynamics of hypersonic flight to anyone who'd listen. But no matter how much she knew about the plane, one thing still eluded her: the cockpit. Test pilots were revered at Skunk Works, treated almost like celebrities. They were the ones who took the risks, pushing experimental aircraft to their limits and beyond. Ellie admired them from afar, but she also felt a pang of frustration every time she saw them climb into the Darkstar's sleek cockpit. She knew the aircraft inside out, better than most of them, but because she didn't have the official credentials or the right background, she was stuck on the ground. It gnawed at her, not because she wanted fame or glory, but because she believed she could contribute something meaningful. She wanted to prove that flying wasn't just about pedigree, it was about skill, instinct, and heart. One evening, after another long day of analyzing flight data, Ellie stayed late in the hangar. The place was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery replaced by the faint echo of her footsteps on the concrete floor. She stood in front of the Darkstar, staring at its sharp lines and glossy surface. One day, she whispered to herself, running, her hand along its fuselage. "One day you're going to let me show you what I can do." Little did she know that day would come sooner than she expected. It started with a routine test flight. The Darkstar was scheduled for a series of high-speed maneuvers over the desert, designed to push its engines and control systems to the brink. The mission was critical. Data gathered during these tests would determine whether the aircraft was ready for its next phase of development. Everyone involved knew the stakes were high, and tensions ran thick as the team prepared for launch. The designated pilot for the mission was a seasoned veteran named Captain Reynolds. He had decades of experience under his belt and a reputation for being unflappable in the cockpit. No one doubted his ability to handle the Darkstar, but even the best pilots weren't immune to surprises. As the countdown began, Ellie watched from the observation deck, her stomach twisting with nerves. She always felt this way during test flights, part excitement, part dread. The Darkstar roared to life, its engine spitting fire as it shot down the runway and lifted gracefully into the sky. For a while, everything went according to plan. The plane soared through the air, executing each maneuver flawlessly. Ellie monitored the telemetry feeds, her eyes scanning the numbers for any sign of trouble. Then, without warning, chaos erupted. A sudden spike in engine temperature triggered alarms across the facility. The Darkstar wobbled in the air, its trajectory veering off course. Over the radio, Captain Reynolds' voice crackled with urgency. "I've got a problem here," he shouted. "Engine instability, losing control." Ellie's heart sank. She gripped the railing of the observation deck, watching helplessly as the aircraft spiraled toward disaster. Her mind raced. What could be causing this? Had they missed something during pre-flight checks? Before she could fully process what was happening, Captain Reynolds made a split-second decision. He ejected. The parachute deployed, carrying him safely away from the plummeting aircraft. But now the Darkstar was on its own, hurtling toward the ground at unimaginable speed. Millions, if not billions, of dollars worth of research and technology were moments away from being reduced to scrap metal. Panic spread through the control room. Engineers scrambled to assess the situation, shouting orders and debating whether remote shutdown protocols might save the aircraft. But Ellie knew there was only one option left. Someone had to get inside the cockpit and stabilize the plane before it crashed. Without thinking twice, she bolted out of the observation deck and sprinted toward the hangar where backup planes were stored. Technicians shouted after her, telling her to stop, but Ellie ignored them. She climbed into the nearest available jet, a smaller trainer model, and powered up the engines. By the time anyone realized what she was doing, she was already taxiing down the runway. "Ellie, what are you doing?" A voice crackled over the radio. It was one of the lead engineers, his tone a mix of disbelief and anger. "I'm saving our plane," she replied calmly, her focus razor-sharp. "Trust me." Her hands moved with precision as she guided the trainer jet into the air, chasing after the runaway Darkstar. The two aircraft danced across the sky, one spiraling out of control, the other closing the gap with astonishing speed. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind remained clear. This was her moment, the chance to prove herself not just to others but to herself. When she finally caught up to the Darkstar, she positioned her jet alongside it, matching its erratic movements. Using advanced docking techniques she'd practiced. In simulators, she managed to lock onto the larger aircraft and transfer herself into the cockpit. It was a risky maneuver, one that required nerves of steel and pinpoint accuracy. But Ellie didn't hesitate. She slid into the seat, strapped herself in, and took control of the throttles. The Darkstar bucked beneath her, resisting her commands. Its engines screamed in protest, threatening to tear themselves apart. But Ellie refused to give up. Drawing on every ounce of knowledge she'd gained over the years, she coaxed the aircraft back under control. Slowly, painstakingly, she stabilized its descent, guiding it toward a safe landing zone. The entire base held its breath as the Darkstar touched down, skidding slightly before coming to a halt on the runway. For a moment, there was silence. Then, cheers erupted from the observation deck. Ellie sat in the cockpit, her hands trembling but her spirit soaring. She had done it. Against all odds, she had saved the plane and possibly the entire program. News of Ellie's heroic act spread quickly. Within hours, everyone at Skunk Works knew what had happened. Engineers who had once dismissed her as just a mechanic now looked at her with newfound respect. Even Captain Reynolds, shaken but alive, approached her later that day to shake her hand. "You saved my life," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "And you saved the Darkstar. I owe you everything." Ellie shrugged modestly, though. A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I just did what needed to be done," she replied. "That plane means too much to fail." Her actions didn't go unnoticed by higher-ups either. Word reached the top brass at Lockheed Martin, and soon executives were calling meetings to discuss what to do about Ellie Grayson. Officially, she was reprimanded for disobeying orders and taking unauthorized action. But unofficially, everyone knew she had accomplished something extraordinary. There was no denying her talent or her bravery. In the weeks that followed, Ellie found herself thrust into the spotlight. Reporters wanted interviews, colleagues sought her advice, and young engineers looked to her as a role model. But despite the attention, Ellie remained grounded. She wasn't interested in fame or accolades. She just wanted to keep doing what she loved. Her reward came in the form of an offer she couldn't refuse, a spot on the elite team of test pilots tasked with pushing the boundaries of human flight. It was a dream come true, albeit one that came with immense responsibility. Flying experimental aircraft like the Darkstar was dangerous work, requiring not just technical skill, but mental fortitude. But Ellie was ready. She had proven herself, capable of handling pressure, and she knew she could rise to the occasion. Over the next year, Ellie trained harder than ever before. She spent countless hours in simulators, practicing maneuvers and emergency procedures until they became second nature. She studied weather patterns, navigation systems, and physiological effects of high-speed flight on the human body. Every detail mattered when you were piloting a machine capable of traveling faster than 6 times the speed of sound. Her first official test flight in the Darkstar was both terrifying and exhilarating. As she climbed into the cockpit, she felt a surge of pride mixed with nerves. This was it, the culmination of years of hard work and perseverance. The engines roared to life, and within seconds, the Darkstar shot forward, slicing through the air like a blade. Ellie pushed the throttle to its limit, feeling the G-forces press against her chest as the world blurred outside the cockpit window. For the first time, she truly understood why people called flying an addiction. It wasn't just the thrill of speed or the rush of adrenaline. It was the sense of freedom of breaking free from earthly constraints and touching the infinite. And as the Darkstar soared higher and faster than any aircraft before it, Ellie knew she had found her place in the world. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She wasn't just a dreamer. She was a pilot, one who had earned her wings through sheer determination and grit. Ellie's journey as a test pilot for the SR-72 Darkstar was nothing short of extraordinary. Every flight pushed her closer to the edge of human capability, but it also brought her immense satisfaction. The Darkstar wasn't just an aircraft. It was a living, breathing challenge, one that demanded everything she had to give, and Ellie gave it willingly. She lived for those moments when the engines roared, the horizon blurred, and gravity seemed like a suggestion rather than a law. But as thrilling as her new role was, it came with risks far greater than anything she'd faced before. One crisp morning, Ellie found herself in the briefing room at Skunk Works, surrounded by engineers, analysts, and military officials. The atmosphere was tense, the kind of tension that made your shoulders stiff and your palms sweat. A large screen displayed satellite images of a remote region halfway across the globe. It wasn't hard to guess what this meeting was about. Reconnaissance. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were developing their own hypersonic weapon systems, technology that could shift the balance of power if left unchecked. The mission was clear: gather critical data on these advancements without being detected. The problem? This wasn't going to be a simple flyover. The area was heavily guarded, with radar networks designed to spot even the stealthiest aircraft. Flying into such hostile territory meant taking unimaginable risks, not just for Ellie, but for the entire program. If the Darkstar fell into enemy hands, it would spell disaster. Everyone in the room knew this, yet all eyes turned to Ellie when the lead engineer asked, "Are you ready for this?" She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding. "I'm ready," she said firmly. Her voice carried a quiet confidence, one born not from arrogance but from countless hours spent preparing for exactly this moment. Still, deep down, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing against her chest. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about protecting something bigger than herself. Preparation for the mission took days. Ellie worked closely with the engineering team to fine-tune every aspect of the Darkstar. They modified its sensors to detect even the faintest radar signals, upgraded its electronic countermeasures, and ran endless simulations to anticipate potential threats. Ellie pored over maps, studying the terrain and memorizing escape routes. She practiced evasive maneuvers in the simulator until her muscles remembered them better than her mind did. By the time the mission day arrived, she felt as prepared as anyone could be. But she also knew no amount of preparation could account for the unpredictable nature of combat zones. The night before the flight, Ellie lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded her, not because she was scared, but because her mind refused to slow down. She replayed scenarios in her head, imagining how she'd react if things went wrong. What if the enemy spotted her? What if their anti-aircraft missiles locked onto the Darkstar? What if? Finally, exhaustion won out, and she drifted into a restless sleep. When her alarm buzzed early the next morning, she woke with a start, her heart already racing. Today was the day. The hangar was eerily quiet as Ellie suited up. The sleek silver and black flight suit hugged her body like a second skin, its patches representing years of hard work and determination. As she walked toward the Darkstar, she felt a strange mix of calm and adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was what she had trained for, dreamed of, fought for. Now, it was time to deliver. Climbing into the cockpit, Ellie took a deep breath and focused. Around her, technicians completed final checks, their voices crackling over the radio. "All systems green," one of them announced. "You're good to go." With a nod, Ellie powered up the engines. The familiar rumble sent vibrations through the airframe, grounding her in the present. She taxied down the runway, her fingers dancing over the controls as the Darkstar surged forward. Within seconds, the plane lifted off the ground, climbing higher and faster until the world below became a blur of greens and browns. Crossing into enemy airspace was like stepping into another dimension. The sky above was clear, but the invisible web of radar and missile systems loomed everywhere. Ellie relied on the Darkstar's advanced stealth capabilities, flying low and fast, weaving between mountains and valleys to avoid detection. Her eyes darted between the instrument panel and the horizon, every sense attuned to the task at hand. For hours, the mission proceeded smoothly. Ellie transmitted streams of data back to command, each byte of information vital to understanding the enemy's progress. But then, just as she began her return journey, alarms blared inside the cockpit. Enemy fighters had scrambled, alerted, to her presence. Her pulse quickened as red dots appeared on her radar screen, closing in fast. There was no time to panic. Ellie banked sharply, pulling the Darkstar into a tight spiral that sent G-forces crushing against her body. The enemy jets followed, their pilots undoubtedly skilled but unable to match the agility of the Darkstar. Ellie executed maneuvers so daring they seemed impossible. A corkscrew dive here, a sudden climb there, all while maintaining control of the aircraft. Missiles streaked past her canopy, exploding harmlessly in the distance. Each near miss fueled her resolve. She thought of everyone counting on her, the engineers who built the Darkstar, the soldiers whose lives depended on the intelligence she gathered, and the little girl in Willow Creek who once stared up at the sky, dreaming of flight. Failure wasn't an option. After what felt like an eternity, the enemy fighters broke off their pursuit, unable to keep up with the Darkstar's blistering speed. Ellie let out a shaky breath, her hands still gripping the controls tightly. She adjusted course and headed home, her heart pounding but her spirit unbroken. When Ellie landed safely back at base, the relief was palpable. Engineers rushed to inspect the Darkstar, ensuring it hadn't sustained any damage during the intense chase. Inside the debriefing room, military officials pored over the data she'd collected, their expressions a mix of awe and gratitude. Ellie sat quietly, sipping water as the adrenaline slowly ebbed away. "You saved us today," one of the officers said, looking directly at her. "Not just with your skills, but with your courage. We couldn't have done this without you." Ellie nodded, though she didn't feel like a hero. To her, she'd simply done her job. But as she looked around the room, seeing the respect in people's eyes, she realized something important. She had earned her place among them. No longer was she the mechanic who got kicked out of Laughlin Air Force Base or the underdog fighting for recognition. She was Eleanor Grayson, test pilot of the SR-72 Darkstar, and a force to be reckoned with. In the weeks that followed, Ellie continued to push boundaries, breaking records and shattering expectations with each mission. Her name became synonymous with excellence, and her story inspired others to chase their dreams regardless of obstacles. Yet despite her growing fame, Ellie remained humble. She knew the skies were vast and unforgiving, and there was always more to learn, more to achieve. But one thing was certain. Ellie Grayson had proven beyond doubt that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them head-on. And she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Ellie's life had changed in ways she never imagined. From the girl who used to tinker with tractors in Willow Creek to the woman now flying the most advanced aircraft ever built, her journey was nothing short of extraordinary. But there was still one chapter left unwritten, a chapter that would bring her full circle. As much as she loved her work at Skunk Works and the respect she'd earned, a part of her couldn't forget where it all began: Laughlin Air Force Base. It wasn't just about proving something to the people who had doubted her. It went deeper than that. Laughlin represented rejection, struggle, and resilience. It was the place where her dreams had been dismissed, but also where her fire had been ignited. Returning there wasn't just an idea. It became a mission. Ellie wanted to step back onto that runway, not as someone cast aside, but as someone who had risen above every obstacle thrown her way. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. The military announced plans for a special demonstration event at Laughlin Air Force Base, showcasing cutting-edge technology and celebrating advancements in aviation. Pilots from across the country were invited to participate, and naturally the SR-72 Darkstar was top of the list. When Ellie received the official request to attend and fly the Darkstar during the display, she didn't hesitate. She accepted immediately, knowing this was her chance to close the loop. As the date approached, Ellie prepared meticulously. She ran simulations, reviewed flight patterns, and coordinated with engineers to ensure the Darkstar would perform flawlessly. But more than anything, she thought about what she wanted to say when she returned. This wasn't just about showing off her skills or proving doubters wrong. It was about inspiring others, especially young recruits who might feel like they didn't belong just as she once had. On the morning of the event, Ellie woke early, her nerves buzzing with anticipation. The drive to Laughlin felt surreal, almost dreamlike. Familiar landmarks greeted her along the way: the old diner near the base entrance, the rows of hangars lining the horizon. But everything looked different now. She wasn't the same person who had left years ago, tail tucked between her legs. Today, she arrived as a pilot, a trailblazer, and a symbol of perseverance. When she pulled up to the gate, the guard recognized her immediately. "Welcome back, ma'am," he said with a salute. Ellie smiled, feeling a rush of emotion she hadn't anticipated. Just stepping foot on the base again brought memories flooding back: the long hours in the hangar, the dismissive looks from superiors, the day she was told she didn't belong. But now those memories felt less like scars and more like badges of honor. The airfield buzzed with excitement as spectators gathered for the demonstration. Pilots, mechanics, officers, and civilians filled the stands, their eyes fixed on the sleek silhouette of the SR-72 Darkstar parked on the tarmac. Cameras flashed, children pointed excitedly, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. For many, this was their first glimpse of the legendary aircraft, and for some, their first encounter with its pilot. Ellie stood beside the Darkstar in her custom flight suit, its patches gleaming proudly under the sun. She scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. Sure enough, she spotted Colonel Whitaker, the man who had ordered her removal years ago. He stood near the front, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Ellie took a deep breath, steadying herself. This moment wasn't just about facing him. It was about rewriting history. As the ceremony began, a senior officer stepped up to the microphone to introduce the day's events. When he called Ellie's name, the crowd erupted into applause. She walked forward, her boots clicking against the pavement, and climbed onto the platform. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking in the sea of faces before her. Then, she spoke. "I grew up dreaming of the skies," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I dreamed of breaking barriers, pushing limits, and exploring places few people ever see. But dreams aren't always easy to chase. When I first came here, I was told I didn't belong. I was told my dreams were too big, my ambitions too unrealistic. And for a while, I believed them." She paused, letting her words sink in. The crowd was silent, hanging on every syllable. "But here's the thing about dreams," she continued. "They don't disappear just because someone tells you they're impossible. They stay with you, whispering in your ear, reminding you of who you are and what you're capable of." So I kept going. I worked harder, learned more, and refused to let anyone define me. And today I'm standing here not just as a pilot, but as proof that no dream is too big if you're willing to fight for it. The audience erupted into cheers, some people rising to their feet. Ellie glanced toward Colonel Whitaker, who nodded slowly, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. She didn't need his approval anymore, but seeing even a hint of acknowledgement meant something. After the speech, it was time for the main event. Ellie climbed into the cockpit of the Darkstar, her heart pounding with excitement. As the engines roared to life, the crowd fell silent, anticipation crackling in the air. With a burst of speed, the Darkstar shot down the runway and lifted gracefully into the sky. It soared higher and faster, performing maneuvers so precise and breathtaking that gasps echoed across the field below. Ellie pushed the aircraft to its limits, executing loops, rolls, and high-speed passes that left spectators awestruck. At one point, she dipped low over the runway, the Darkstar's shadow gliding silently across the ground. It was a nod to the past, a reminder of how far she'd come. Finally, she landed smoothly, the tires kissing the asphalt as the engines wound down. When Ellie stepped out of the cockpit, the applause was deafening. People rushed to congratulate her, shaking her hand and patting her on the back. Among them was Colonel Whitaker, who approached with a hesitant smile. "Grayson," he said gruffly, extending his hand. "Welcome back." Ellie shook his hand firmly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "But I'm here to show you what we're capable of, not just me, but everyone willing to fight for their dreams." In the days that followed, Ellie's return to Laughlin became the stuff of legend. Recruits whispered her name in reverence, drawing inspiration from her story. Mechanics and engineers marveled at her technical expertise, while pilots admired her skill and courage. Even Colonel Whitaker admitted privately that kicking her out had been a mistake, one he hoped wouldn't be repeated. For Ellie, the experience was bittersweet. It wasn't about revenge or gloating, it was about closure. She had faced her past head-on and emerged stronger, wiser, and prouder of who she was. More importantly, she had shown countless others that they too could overcome adversity and achieve greatness. As she flew away from Laughlin Air Force Base one final time, the Darkstar slicing through the clouds, Ellie felt a profound sense of peace. Her journey wasn't over. There were still skies to explore, records to break, and barriers to shatter. But for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had started as a dreamer in a small town and had become a pioneer in the world of aviation. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly hold new challenges, she knew one thing for certain. She was ready for whatever came next. Because Ellie Grayson wasn't just a pilot, she was a force of nature, and the skies were hers to conquer.